So by now we have gone through all the fundamental concepts that are used in reinforcement learning. We understand what are the basic elements of reinforcement learning. Why do we need value functions to estimate the value of a state or a given function? And we understood that what is it is meant by getting a return at a given timestamp t. We understand that how does Bellman equation works with the temporal difference method and Monte Carlo method to update the value of a state. And we saw that what is the advantage of the advantage function. So by now, we have understood multiple concepts related to reinforcement learning, but we have not seen but we have not seen yet so far that how do we solve our reinforcement learning using these concepts. These are all of these concepts are sort of standalone in themselves, and we need to b- make use of these concepts in order to solve a reinforcement learning problem. So these concepts, let alone LLM reasoning, these concepts are used in any reinforcement learning algorithm. Now that we have the pieces of the puzzle, now the final thing is to bring them together and actually solve the puzzle. And for that, we are going to use reinforcement learning algorithms. And the family of reinforcement learning algorithms which we are going to study are related to policy gradients. Both PPO and GRPO, which are used for LLM reasoning, are part of the policy gradient algorithm. So we are going to study policy. First, we are going to understand what are the policy gradient algorithm, and then we are going to see how PPO and GRPO works. And I also want to tell you guys that now that you know these concept of reinforcement learning and you are going to understand a complete family of reinforcement learning algorithms that are used to solve reinforcement learning algorithm, you can solve any reinforcement learning problem, alone LLM reasoning. You can use the same concept and you can use the same algorithm that we are going to study to solve any reinforcement learning problem, let alone LLM reasoning. So if you have understood yet so far, it's a big win for you, and you can now confidently say that you have the gist of reinforcement learning, and if any reinforcement learning problem is given to you, you can solve it via these concept and with the help of these algorithms. uh, my reason for recapping the everything we have learned so far and this video is that I want you to really think about each and every thing that we have learned so far in this course, because if you do not have the right mental model for a concept in reinforcement learning, it gets very difficult when that concept is used in an algorithm. So you need to have the correct mental model to understand what are value functions. You need to understand that in order to find the value of a state, you have to use the state value function. And if you want to find the value of a given action, if you want to find the value of taking an action A in a given state, you have to use the action value function. You need to understand the concept of return. That return represents the accumulation of all the rewards that you can get from any timestamp t. You need to understand the significance of the Bellman equation and how does it work with the temporal difference in Monte Carlo methods to update the value of a state. Because if you do not have the right mental model, then it would be very difficult for you to understand that why this concept is being used in an LLM algorithm. I missed advantage function. Advantage function is equally as important. So before we move forward, if you have any question, any confusion regarding anything that we have learned so far, I would recommend you to ask me questions regarding it in the comment section. So before we move forward, everything is crystal clear in your mind, and when we are actually going to move when we are actually going to understand an algorithm, you would not only be able to understand the algorithm itself, but you would also be able to see that how these pieces of puzzle, how these concepts come together in order to solve a reinforcement learning problem. Because so far we have just seen different concept of reinforcement learning. We have not seen that how these concepts come together to solve an RL problem. So yeah, it is my goal to teach you a family of reinforcement learning algorithms that can help to solve any reinforcement learning problem, let alone LLM reasoning. The reason for choosing policy gradient algorithms is that in LLM reasoning, policy gradient algorithms are used. So yeah, I hope that you have understood what we have studied so far, and from the next lectures, we are going to understand policy gradient algorithms. Thank you.